You may have heard of the term mansplaining, and if you haven't, you've probably been living in some anti-feminist dystopia. Mansplaining is a word that was coined to describe the male habit, prototypically male habit, of explaining things, particularly to women, particularly in a condescending manner, particularly if that explanation is coming in some ways because she's a woman, that she doesn't know because she's female. I was pretty annoyed when I first heard the word because I was like, I'm not sure that's a real thing. And even if it is a real thing, is it so necessary to describe it in such a sexist way that adding man onto the front of otherwise word that lacked any valence whatsoever suddenly made it a negative thing, a bad thing to do? But it kept popping up in conversation and on the internet, and because of that, kept popping up into my head. I think perhaps because, it is a real thing. I certainly started noticing some of my behaviour and going, I mansplain a little bit, and people mansplain to me. And it's kind of fucking annoying when somebody explains something to you that you already know, because if you're disagreeable, and men on average are less agreeable than women, you can go, I know. But sometimes the social situation, someone's seniority perhaps makes that uncomfortable. And if you're a woman and more agreeable, it probably happens more often. And by happening more often might lead into a cycle where somebody's like, of course I have to explain to her, I had to explain last time and this time and this time, that it might become a self-reinforcing behaviour. And it's problematic. But does it need to be so sexist? Well, maybe. Actually, because the word was so provocative, it evoked such strong emotions within me that it actually made it easier to call out and recognise the behaviour because it was so sticky. And that made me think, this is useful. So I thought, why not be a little bit, equal? And I thought of the term womoaning. Womoaning is a portmanteau of woman and moaning. I'm not sure I needed to explain that, did I? It's the prototypically female habit of talking about problems and not so much desiring to talk about solutions. It's that thing of, your girlfriend gets home and she says, I had the worst day today. And you go, oh no, what happened? She says, I was in the meeting and my boss, and I know that boss. You've heard stories about that boss before, right? And she looked right at me and she said, some people are going to have to pick up their game. And then the conversation might go one of two ways. One direction, the foolish man might then try and fix the problem, might try to mansplain, you could say, by saying, you could go to HR, or maybe you need to have a chat with her, or might try to explain what might have been going on for the boss. Maybe she's having a tough day or something like that. And if you do that, you've probably noticed this fairly rapidly escalating level of unpleasantness. And you don't understand why, because you, as a mansplainer and somebody who doesn't womoan so much, think, why would I ever come and share my pain with somebody? Surely the only reason you'd do that is because you want somebody to help you fix it. Well, they don't. They know about HR. They told you about HR in the first place. They just wanted to vent. They just wanted to womoan. So what should you do in that situation? Well, you should do whatever you want to do. But what might be more effective if you want this to go away and calm down is to just sit and listen for a bit. Womoaning is, the clinical term for it is recursive co-rumination. It seems that psychologists have dropped the word recursive now and they just use the word co-rumination, but I like recursive because it describes that cyclical habit of you thought you discussed this already and you got off this point, but now you're back to it again and you're like, but I thought we dealt with this. And co-rumination is based on that word describing ruminants, or animals that chew their own cud. They chew back up old thoughts, particularly unpleasant thoughts, negative affect, something that was upsetting, somebody that didn't invite you somewhere, something like that, and goes over it again and again. Now, most of us ruminate. Rumination is linked with higher levels of thinking that is linked to depression, which is we see our problems as bigger, as less fixable, as more persistent. Co-rumination is doing exactly the same thing, but with other people, sharing that pain with them. Is it a bad thing? No. It's just a thing. In fact, in some studies, it's been linked with higher levels of closeness, a feeling of closeness with relationships, because I finally shared something with you and you know how I feel, and perhaps even builds a sense of we're in this together, we both experience this thing. If you'd like some examples of that, cruise on over to Reddit /r/2x chromosomes, which is the front page of the internet's forum entirely for women. And what you'll see pretty much from top to bottom, with a couple of exceptions, are people womoaning and sharing their pain, and other people piling on and going, oh, well, darling, it's tough and something similar happened to me, and generally sharing with that negative affect. It's not a bad thing, but can it be problematic in certain situations? Well, yeah, any bloke who's been with a perpetual, persistent womoaner will tell you it's kind of a drag. Most of us, most women indeed, even women who womoan, can recognise that it's problematic. It can make the problem seem bigger, seem worse. We just get better and better at finding problems and moaning about them, and that might not always be the best thing. Just the same as mansplaining. It's not necessarily bad. There can be places where it's really effective to do it, to demonstrate your knowledge to somebody else, to gain the upper hand in a conversation, to show off how smart you are about something. It could be hugely valuable, but it's got, as we discussed before, some problems with it. It's not to say that one's good and the other's bad, but in the interest of being a rounded individual, it's can you do both? So, women, womoan less. Recognise that it's a bit of a downer. It gets people down. And if you're in the habit of perpetually womoaning, particularly in that recursive, we're going over this again and again and again fashion, then just stop. Just get to a certain point and say, thanks for listening and we're done here. Or if your man trying to be helpful starts mansplaining to you, just recognise that he's trying to be helpful, and perhaps womoners mansplain more. Do that thing that we all love, which is set clear boundaries in your relationship. If he starts trying to help and you don't want that help, just say, I just want you to listen. I don't need your help at the moment. Just listen to me. And it'll be so helpful. In fact, I had a great story. I introduced this concept to a friend of mine because I think you might be able to tell I'm a little nervous about posting this. And I no sooner said the word womoaning than she went, oh, I know what that is. My friend did that to me. And she said not even a friend, a sort of colleague, somebody she knew vaguely from work, got in the lift with her and started venting about her boyfriend who wouldn't listen. And she said, I tell him that when he gets the bagels, he's got to cut them before he puts them in the freezer, because when he gets them out, you're not able to cut them and they're crumbly. To which my friend turned around and said, oh, if you go to Coles, they'll pre-cut the bagels for you. At which point this friend turned around and said, I don't want you to explain or help it. I just want you to listen. Fantastic. So, womoners, womoan less and mansplain more. Now, men, mansplain less. Just recognise, and I still am working on this, that in some points in conversation, you sharing your thoughts isn't the most important thing to do. And perhaps pause sometimes and go, do you already know this? Or would you like to explain this? And throw that limelight to other people who might otherwise not feel so confident or so capable of stepping up and stepping in there. And, as well, perhaps you should womoan more. Perhaps some of this toxic idea of masculinity and these sky-high levels of suicide for men across the world is driven by this men don't cry idea. And maybe sometimes come home and say to your girlfriend, I'm just having a tough time because my relationship with my dad isn't quite what I wanted it to be, and I didn't want to burden you with this. Because if your experience is anything like mine, you will get this gushing of love and support, and like we're finally communicating with one another. So it's not about one being good and another being bad. It's just about recognizing that yin and yang of male and female behavior, and that leaning into a space into which you're not normally accustomed to being might yield certain advantages. Cool, I'm nervous about posting this because it's A, nobody's going to give a shit, or B, people are going to give a lot of a shit and try and ruin my life, mostly by womoaning, or C, my hope, which is a very slim chance, people are going to go, that's actually a good point. I'm going to do that. Let's see what happens.